Be strong.
Hello there, Peter here again with another live build of a Mercator system. Today's a bit different. We're going a bit deeper into the geek side of things. We're making an amendment to an existing system. So I'll just give you an outline of what it is we're trying to achieve, how we then think through that, and then what we're doing, because we will be using some Zapier integration for this and webhooks and stuff as well. So I'll share my screen in a moment, but just to give you an overview of what we're doing is it's a legal claims case management system. And what we're trying to do is for each claim has a value and has an invoice attached to it, but we want the ability to offset the invoice from one claim against another, okay, and just track that through. So basically what we're going to do, we're going to have case A and case B, and then I want to be able to mark on case A that it's being offset against case B, and then have the automation do what it needs to do so that when I then look at case B, I can see that it has an offset from case A. So those are sort of carrying values between different data objects that we need to make happen. If we were doing this with two different types of data objects, then we could use reference data, like we've seen in some of the other builds where we have two or three different types. So let's say, for instance, in this, if we had the invoice as a data object itself, then we could reference the case with reference data. But in this instance, we can't actually use the reference data because there's only one data object type and I can't reference itself, if that makes sense. So therefore, we don't have that option here. So we'll look at the automation that we can put in place to carry those values across. So make it a bit clearer. Let me share my screen. So here you can see we've got these two cases that we're going to use in our example, and we have here A and B on the end of the reference so that we know which, and you'll see we're using an invoice number as well, I123, but B for the one and A for the other, just to make it simple for us to keep track of these, so it's clear which one's information is where. So what we need to do is I come into case A. At the moment the option doesn't exist to add this in, but I want to add case B's reference and case B's invoice number somewhere on this case, so that I know it's being offset against case B and invoice B. And then I want to automatically update case B to show that it has a reference or an offset from case A, okay, and make that easy to see when that happens. So the first thing we need to do is we need to add our fields. So I need two fields on the case to show what case is being offset against, and then two additional fields to show which case is offset from. So for that case, the client reference number, and for the invoice number. So let's go and add those fields first. On the left we go to the gear for admin, and then we go into object builder, and we can go into cases, click on the eye for that. We can skip over to sections and fields because this is already built. We don't need to do that. We're going to add a new section, and we'll call it invoice offset details, and we'll add that in there. And then I'm going to create two subsections here: offset against and offset from. And then here we'll go and have the against case reference, we'll call it in this instance. And that's just going to be text. And we'll have the against invoice reference. And again, that's going to be text. And then same, a from version for that. So we'll have from case reference, again as text, and a from invoice reference. Okay, so what this allows me to do is I can now come in here and I can see if this case is being offset against another one, I can see against which one it is. And if I look at the other case, I should be able to see which case it's being offset from, and I can see those details there. So we've got our fields, we can go and save that. And then we can go and review and then start building the required automation for that. Okay, so if we now go back to my record here and my cases, we should see we've got that extra section with the pairs of fields there. So basically what we want to do is create automation that says if the case reference is not null, then go and do the magic, find the matching case and update the offset from details on that case. Okay, so the user's perspective will be, I fill in, I want to offset A against B, so I'm going to fill in B's details in these two fields. The system will then go and find A and add, or find B and then update these two fields on the B case. So you wouldn't have really, you could get there, but it'll be like a cascade of offsets if you end up with all four fields populated. You should really only have on a case either the offset against or the offset from populated for that. So let's now jump to our automation. So what we're going to do is we need to, at minimum, we need to fire a webhook at Zapier so that Zapier can do the finding and the referencing and everything for us in this case, to use the values of case B to identify case B to update it with values from case A. If you're still keeping track, very good. So let's start with our automation. So we'll go into the admin settings again. Now at the time of this recording, automation is still in the older interface, so we hop over there and we go into our automation. So the first thing we need to do is build a webhook action, but we need to go and set up the start of the Zap. So we're going to fire a webhook out of Macanta at Zapier. So I need Zapier to catch the hook for that. So let's go in there, start, and we can give this a name. So this is just reference invoice offset details. Start off, we're going to go for a webhook here, and we're going to say we wanted to catch the hook. Okay. If we go continue, that now gives us this URL which we can copy, and that's the destination URL where we're going to send the information out of Macanta to Zapier. So we can go in here and we can go and create our first one, and we say reference invoice offset data, and we add that. We're going to choose cases. Now this only needs to happen once, so we will have our client as a relationship. I'm jumping ahead to something else. I'll come back to running it only once. But what we need to do here is decide what fields do we need to send across. Okay, so we by default we send over the contact ID for the contact that triggers it, the object ID, but we need to decide now. I know we're going to need 4 fields. Okay, we are going to need the case number against. We are going to need the invoice number for the against, and then I'm going to need the client reference number, and I'm going to need the original invoice number. Okay, so that's what we're going to need here, because we are going to use the case number, the against case number, as our reference to find the correct object and then update it with the paired client reference and invoice number. So let's just go and make sure I have those field titles correct. I've got against case reference, against invoice reference, and here we've got case number against and invoice number against. So it looks as if there's a delay in the update. So let's save that, and then what I'm just going to do is to log out and log back in the old interface to make sure that we have the most up-to-date information pulled in. And all of this will go away once we're done with the migration. So we go back here, we go to our webhook again, and we can go reference offset. See, those fields are now not available because they've changed, but I can go the against case reference, and the against invoice reference is what I'm after. So that is the information I'm giving it, and I'm getting it to go and update some additional details with that there. Okay, so we don't need any custom key pairs here. The value pairs, we can just use the fields, and you'll see it says here leave blank to use the current value. If you want to hard code sending something over, you can put in a value, but if you leave it blank, it'll use the value that the data object holds when it's being sent. So let's go and save that, and I'll just copy that title, because now we need to create a trigger action that this webhook action is going to be loaded into. So we'll go here and add that. We go again, case, and we go client. Now you'll notice that the webhook of ours isn't there yet. So if you find that that is the case, just save, refresh the screen, and the HTML will go and fetch those details for you. And just make sure invoice offset, and I'll save that. Okay, and then we need a condition. We need to decide under what condition should this be filled in. Okay, this be triggered. So I'm going to say if the let's just confirm that field name again, against case reference, if the against case reference is not null. Okay, if I save a value in there, it'll trigger this automation. Now here we come on to run the restart after. Do we run this once and then never again? Do we want to be able to run it again? If you need it to be dynamic, and well, whenever I make a change to that field I need the automation to run, then you're better off using the amend in the condition to say that if this field is amended, and then you can set this to every minute. So if it's amended 17 times in the day, the automation will run 17 times. I'm going to go for never, because in this scenario we only need this to run once. But while I'm testing, I'm going to set this to 1 minute, because what that'll do is that'll fire a hook at Zapier every minute or so. And that then means I don't have to go and mess around with making changes to get a new case to fire. I can just keep catching and it'll update, and I can work with it. So I'm going to set this to 1 minute for testing purposes, and then we can come back and change it to never. So we go for client, and then we go here the against case reference, and I said is not null. If I want it to be that it's when it's amended, then I can use amended, and then it'll run whenever someone changes that reference number. But we're going to keep this here as is not null. We only need it to run that one time. So I can save that. So then old HTML, we refresh. And now when we go to our automation, we can go and load our webhook into our trigger action. So again, if I go and search for the offset, I can come here and there's our offset there. Okay. And now I can also go to my automation group and I can go to defaults and we'll add one in here. And I say here, if the against case reference is not null, which is what we built the condition, then reference invoice offset. Okay, and we turn that on and we save that. So just to recap what we've done, we've built a webhook that's going to send information to Zapier. It's both going to send us the, if I go and load the correct one, it's going to send the values that I've filled in, so the values of case B, and it's then going to also carry with it the values in case A because I want to write them into case B when I identify it. So that's our webhook. We've created a trigger action which has loaded that webhook into it as a payload. So when this action fires, it'll fire that webhook. And then we've set a condition of if that field is not null, fire this. For testing, we've set it to every minute, but in reality, we'll set that to never because we only need it to run once. And then we've gone to our automation group and we've made that pair match. If against case reference is not null, then reference the invoice offset, and that's on and been saved. Okay, so now our next job is to go and put something in here. So let's just see, we've got case A and case B. I'm going to offset A against B. So in that instance, I'm going to go into A and I'm going to fill in C123B and I123B as my reference and invoice number. I'll go into A, go in here, and we go for C123B, and I put in the invoice reference as well, and then I save that. Okay, and then we have to see that the automation runs, which you can do by clicking on the three little dots at the end, and you go into history, and that shows you the automation history, so we can see that hasn't run yet. So we just need to give that a moment to be caught, and that'll run, and then we can come in here to Zapier. We can go into continue, and we're going to say test the trigger. So there we can see, looks like it has now fired because we've got some information there. So just to go and show you, if I go back here, you can now see here the reference offset has fired as automation for that. So now we have captured information here inside Zapier. So now we can go and do our magic and talk back to Mercator and amend things. So just to show you what information we have, we've got the contact ID. So this is the client's contact ID. The item ID is the data object. So if we go in here and I open this case, you can see that number sits at the top there. Okay. Then that's the app name. We've got that it's cases. The relationship is client. We've got here that I'm referencing it against case B, and it's come from case A. Okay, so what I now want to do is I want to say to the system, go and find case B for me, because normally they're not necessarily going to be next to each other like this. Okay, I've got the reference numbers. It could be 1,000 cases in the system. Just go and find case B for me and update it to show that it's got a offset from case A. Okay, which is why we brought case A details with us. So we can say, go and find the object where the against case, where the reference, the client reference number is C123B, and then populate these values. So let's go and do that. So we can now go in and we can search for Mercator on the next step. Now this account, not quite sure what Zapier is doing there, but this account is already connected, so I won't go through that process. But the Zap we're going to use is the get data object by field value, okay? Because we know the field value. Not quite sure what Zapier is doing here. Canter, yeah, and by field value, now it's happy. Don't know. So basically, I know from up here, we know that we're looking for the case where the reference is C123B. I don't know what the item ID is, which is what I need to update it, so I can use this value to search and retrieve the matching item ID for the other object. So we can go in here by field value, and we go continue, choose the account, it's already connected, and we go in there. So now I have to say, what field am I going to search in? Now on our cases, the reference number is saved in this client reference number. So you just copy the text as it is, and then you have to say what value are you searching for. So we're not typing it in manually because we need to make sure that this is dynamic. So I know that I'm looking for that value. C123B is our search term for it. And then the data object type I wanted to look under is under cases. Okay. So what this is doing, and let's go and rename this, is identify matching offset case. Okay, because we need that ID number in order to automatically update it. So we can continue in here, and then we can run a test. So what it's going to do, it's going to look for a data object type of cases where in the field client reference number it holds this value C123B. Okay, so we can test and review. And here we go. So if I go back in here and we look at case C123B, you can see the ID ends in 5B718, and here we now have the item ID 5B718. So we know we've identified the correct case. Okay, so let's just go on to that. So now we have that ID, we can now go on to the next step, which is to update this item with the values of case A to say that it's been offset from. Okay, so let's go, and we go another step for Mercator. And in this instance, we are just going to edit a data object because we have the ID. So choose the account again and continue. And then contact ID came with this, so contact ID will be dynamically populated. Data object ID we've just identified here, so I'm going to use that item ID there. And data object type we know is cases, and the relationship we know was triggered by client, so we'll continue to use client here. So now you see we get all these fields, and we're really just looking for the from case reference and the from invoice reference. Okay, so I'll do the from case reference first. Again, it came from here, and I know that it's the client reference number because remember it was on A that it's being referenced from, and it's against B. So I want that value in there, and then the from invoice reference again is our invoice number up here from case A. Okay, so that's all we do. We're not doing anything with the other fields. We don't need to update any of them. So I can go and say continue, and we'll give this a name, and we'll say this is update offset from values. Okay, so we can then go in and say test that, and we come back green. So now we go back here, we go to our case, and if I now go case A, what we did was we wrote those values in there. That triggers our automation, and when we go to look at case B, I can now see that it's referenced from case A. Okay, so that's then the two talking back and forth to each other. Now, like I said, you're only likely to have one of these filled in this scenario, because otherwise if I now add case C's values in here, then case B's values is going to get written into the offset from for case C, and that's all perfectly fine, but you've essentially in that scenario you're offsetting A against B and B against C, so what you're really doing is offsetting A against C. So but that's depending on the use case. Okay, so now all we need to do is just go back and make sure on our trigger condition that we change this back to never, because I don't want this to run every minute. I just need it to run once. We save that, we can go back to Zapier and we can say turn on that zap. Okay, I can't tell you what Zapier is unhappy about because it's their own internal error. I can only ignore it and see whether it will let me turn the zap on or not. Now it tells me it's already enabled, but I think you and I can both see it says off. So let us go out of here and see if it's happy. And let's just go and see. Reference invoice offset details. Yeah, it is now on. It just wasn't displayed on the screen. So that's a bit more complicated than just your everyday use. But essentially what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, I want to offset this invoice against that case. So all I do is fill in those details there, and the automation then goes and finds, okay, which case has the reference C123B in this instance. It's easy access for us here for the example, and go and update that it's C123A and this invoice that it's offset from. Okay, so then you can then build a case there of how what widget you want to build to track these, any other automation you want to put in place, generate a task, anything like that. But for the moment we just wanted to transfer information from one object to another when I don't have all the information in front of me. So yeah, a bit more technical than some of the other videos that I've done, but hopefully that either makes sense or at least generates questions. And if you have any questions, please give us a shout. Happy to clarify anything or to explain how this kind of use case might be the solution to what it is you're trying to achieve. So yeah, any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a good day, have a good evening, whatever time you're viewing this, and I'll be back soon with another live build.
Be strong.